Good morning. I acknowledge that we are gathered today on the traditional territory of the signatories to Treaty 7, and I'd also like to recognize the Métis people who share a very deep connection to this province. June 21st is also National Indigenous Peoples Day. This is a day to honor and recognize the history, achievements, and rich cultures of Indigenous peoples throughout Canada. This day, as part of National Indigenous time to celebrate First Nations, Inuit, and Métis, past, present, and future. Through learning and understanding the history of Indigenous peoples, we will be able to move forward in true partnership and reconciliation. I'm joined today by Calgarian Sydney Weech, and we're here today to raise the alarm over what is a mounting crisis in rent and housing accessibility in this city and across many parts of the province. At a time when Albertans are already struggling with record high inflation, skyrocketing utility bills, and rising car insurance rates, we are now seeing massive spikes in rent as housing stock dwindles. Put another way, the affordability crisis has hit the biggest budget item for most families. That is the roof that's over their head. Calgary was once one of the most affordable cities in Canada, according to rentals.ca. But now, while still not as high as Vancouver, Calgary is now nearly as expensive as Montreal and much, much higher than in Edmonton. Average rents have gone up 15% from last year, and Calgarians are feeling the pressure. We're hearing from families who are being served notice for rent hikes of more than 25%, sometimes as high as 40%. A two-bedroom apartment is now more than $2,000 per month. Searching for housing now involves navigating wait lists and paying application fees. In desperation, some families are settling for unsafe or unsanitary suites, while others are being forced into friends or onto friends' couches, or worse, onto the street. Now, while much of this is driven by market forces like record housing sales and a decline in new listings, this UCP has also contributed significantly to the problem. Over the last 4 years, they slashed rental supplements and they made deep cuts to affordable housing investment, building nearly nothing over the last 4 years. The government's budget currently offers very little in the form of relief going forward. These cuts and inaction also exist alongside what I would characterize as the weakest legislative protection for renters in the country. And according to the City of Calgary's own report, 1 in 10 households are at risk of homelessness. We just cannot have policies that lead to more housing insecurity and growing inequality. Alberta families drive our economy, and they should be able to comfortably afford to live in Alberta's biggest city and many other affected communities. And if we want people to keep moving to our amazing province, they need to have a place to live. Now, this is a problem where all 3 levels of government have a role to play. However, we know this provincial government has abdicated its responsibility to this point. That's why today I've written to the Premier and the Minister we think is responsible for housing to call for the immediate establishment of an all-party legislative committee. This committee would engage with stakeholders and renters and experts, and through that, in a transparent setting, we would draft recommendations to fix this problem in a way that is very, very similar to what happened in the mid-2000s when a similar all-party committee was established, the last time the province faced an affordable housing crisis. This committee would get to work right away, and of course, Alberta's NDP official opposition would be willing and enthusiastic participants. The Premier has indicated the legislature will not sit until the very end of October. But the fact is, Albertans are facing mounting costs for rent and housing, and they just cannot wait that long for their elected representatives to get to work on this important issue. Now, in the meantime, our official opposition will very soon begin our own conversation with impacted Albertans about this crisis. And one of the options that we are going to seek feedback on is a cap on rental increases. Now, we have to have this conversation. There may actually be better options out there than a rental cap, or even if rental cap is something that's important, it certainly doesn't need to be permanent. But the fact of the matter is, Albertans need to hear all the options that are available for them. I mean, for heaven's sakes, imagine already struggling to get by in the middle of this affordability crisis. You're already paying more to keep the lights on. You're paying more to keep your vehicle on the road just so that you can get to work or go to school. And now, suddenly, you're being asked to pay hundreds of dollars of more per month just to keep a roof over your head. It means that Albertans won't be able to pay down their student debt, pay their tuition, or save up to buy their own home one day, and a whole bunch of other things like, oh, I don't know, groceries. Worse, it means that Albertans will have to dig further into debt or ultimately risk being out on the street. This just isn't how we succeed as a province. It is time to start talking about what is and is not reasonable when it comes to rent in this city and many other communities across this province, for students, for workers, for families. Affordability starts with leadership, and it is time for the UCP to show some on this important issue. So thank you very much, and I'm now going to ask Sydney to say a few words.
Thank you, Rachel. Yes, I agree. This is a huge concern for Albertans that rent right now. My partner and I experienced a 22% increase in January. We both work full-time, and we were shocked by the increase. We've had friends that have had 30 to 40% increases, and they're left panicking and frantically searching with nowhere to go. Luckily for our situation, we were able to find something else that fit in our budget, but it was extremely difficult. There were over 100 people applying to the apartment that we were looking at, and we just got lucky. The rental market is extremely competitive, and there's little to nothing protecting renters right now under the current Residential Tenancy Act. Landlords can raise the rent to anything after your current lease is up. I'm really encouraging legislators to seriously look at what other jurisdictions are doing to protect tenants. This could be accomplished through the committee Rachel Notley is proposing. It's time to stand up for renters in Alberta.
Thank you very much, Sydney, for speaking out today on behalf of so many Calgarians who are dealing with this affordable housing crisis, and thank you for being here. So I'm be very pleased now to take any questions folks might have.
Okay, we'll start with questions in person, then go to questions online. Just 1 second there, Mike.
No housing minister. What does that speak of in this government?
Well, the fact that there is no housing minister is an incredibly tone-deaf oversight by Danielle Smith and the UCP. We knew going into this campaign, and it is very clear now as well, that affordable housing is a significant problem for hundreds of thousands of families across this province, and it is a growing problem. And you can't talk about affordability without talking about issues around affordable housing. And this is something on which, as I said before, the UCP's record is very, very troubling. They've cut rent supplements. They attacked the lowest income Albertans by cutting their rental supports. They slashed investment in affordable housing construction and capital. And so on every different front, we're seeing the provincial government pull back from important affordable housing investment. So this is a really, really important amount of work that the provincial government should be doing, and both in terms of resources as well as legislative protections. And in the absence of a minister who is going to take this seriously, an all-party committee is an excellent way to ensure not only accountability and transparency, but also the urgency and quicker action.
Beyond the committee, and what do you want to see done immediately? What would you say to Danielle? Let's get it done, the Premier.
Well, I think we could start very quickly by looking at what's happening in every other province across the country. I mean, the reality is some provinces have had a long-standing regime of rent caps. Other provinces are new to that, and they're putting them in temporary temporary settings. We understand that that has implications for the overall housing market. So we want to look at other pieces that would impact that so that we can make the best decision. And we also, of course, want to look at sort of ensuring that we have more affordable housing stock as a whole to help the, just to have the market do its natural thing and reduce the prices. Or conversely, the other thing you do is you start doing more rental supplements, which is what the government's answer was in the mid-2000s. There's a whole range of opportunities there, but we need the best information in front of us. Right now, nobody is taking it seriously. Nobody is looking at the range of solutions that other provinces have put in, and as a result, Albertans are being left on the side of the road.
Could I speak to Sydney for a moment? Thanks, Sydney. Thanks for doing this. Listen, what did it mean when you hear overnight that, in your case, it went up 22%, I guess, or about $300 a month? So how does that change your life?
Yeah, I mean, it's extremely stressful. Our landlord was not negotiable with us, unfortunately. So, we cared for that unit like it was our own. We were really great renters, never a complaint or anything. And it's kind of just shocking you have to just somehow figure out somewhere else to go. And if you know the rental market right now, there's not a lot of options out there. And so, you're competing with hundreds of other Calgarians that are also looking for an apartment that's affordable. So I would just say, like, the 3 months we were looking, it was just incredibly stressful. I lost a lot of sleep over it, but I just can't continue. I don't want other people to have to experience what we went through these last few months.
And that's my next question. Are you hearing that from your group of friends?
Yeah.
Is this common?
Yeah, I've had a ton of friends. I've had friends have worse increases than what we got, so I felt bad complaining for a bit. But, I've had lots of friends that had like the 30 to 40% increase, and, just the panic that kind of shows up in our friend group when everyone's, frantically looking for a new rental. It's just super disheartening, and I never thought that I'd get priced out of my own city, but here I am.
Do you think it's just the market, or do you think greed plays a part in this? What do you think?
Yeah, I think the way the Residential Tenancy Act is, right now there's nothing really protecting renters. Landlords can increase it to whatever they want. They don't need to give a rhyme or reason for it. In my case, my landlord did not give us a reason. She just thought she could rent it for a lot higher of amount. And, I'm sure she did. But, it's, I personally don't believe there's a good reason for these, $300, $400, $500, $600 increases. It just takes a toll on the renters for sure. Yeah, no worries.
Okay, we'll go to questions on the line. First question goes to Catherine Gurkowski.
That the rent spikes are far worse in Calgary than Edmonton. What is it that you think is going on in Calgary specifically that is leading to this?
Well, I would say that it's actually not just Calgary. There are actually other communities outside of Calgary. We've certainly heard. I mean, it's a huge crisis in Canmore and Banff, for instance, as two examples that I know are beyond the pale. I mean, many people who work in Canmore have to commute from communities long ways away because that's a problem. So it's not just Calgary, but. It's hard to say. I mean, we're probably having more people come here. We know that there are housing pressures, quite frankly, across the country. The difference is that, Alberta has the lowest per capita investment or percentage of affordable housing spaces that are government funded relative to the rest of the country. And we also have among, if not the most weak rental protection legislation. And then, of course, we've seen considerable cuts over the last 4 years. So, Calgary is a world-class city. There's no question. And we try to draw people to the province, and many come to Calgary. But we're going to find ourselves in the same situation where people say, no, we can't afford to be there. And, we could wait until it gets as egregious as Vancouver or Toronto. But to me, that is a failure of government. government if we do that. You know, and one of Alberta's strongest calling cards has been the relative affordability. But if we start to lose that, then we lose out on a whole bunch of other things too. And in the meantime, we have folks like Sydney who are actually in crisis right now. And so we need a government that's going to take that seriously.
Was there a follow-up, Catherine?
Yeah, as part of the election platform and the affordable housing strategy, rent controls were not part of it. And at the time it was released, it said maybe it could be a discussion later on, but we're not considering it. I'm wondering what changed and what are some of the drawbacks of having rent control that you may be concerned with?
Well, as you know, in our platform, we proposed a significant, ambitious investment in, first of all, in rental housing, as well as restoration, in affordable housing construction, as well as restoration of rental supplements. And so had that been part of what was going forward, we might see that it wasn't necessary to go to rent caps. However, we're also seeing just even now, every day, like we're seeing that rent crisis growing day by day by day. And I think it is worth consideration. And that's why I'm talking about this all-party committee. I am happy to hear from experts, developers, as well as housing advocates and everyone in between to talk about what the longer-term implications are of rental caps or controls over a short term or over a long term. And understand that we need to work hard to make sure that we keep the market in balance. But so I think that it's a complex issue, and that's what we talked about in the election, is considering that as well. But we do see that across the country right now, most provinces are taking steps to create even short-term protections for renting families.
All right, next question will go to Brody Thomas from Post Media. Go ahead, Brody. If you unmute, you should be able to talk.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you could describe what you think a rental cap might look like and who would be responsible for enforcing it here in the province, since we've never had one. Like, would this be a percentage, sort of a percentage number where landlords could not increase the rent beyond that set percentage, or what would it look like?
Well, I have to say that's a bit premature. What we're calling for today is an all-party committee to look at options, and some form of rent control is one of several options that we would look at. Much like what happened, as I said, in the mid-2000s. I'm almost ashamed to say that it was immediately prior to me getting elected originally, and so it is during my time, for all intents and purposes, that committee was there. And they looked at a whole range of things. They looked at things like rent supplements, which was ultimately what the government of the day chose to put in place, something that's long since been slashed by the current government. They did look at rent guidelines, and I think when at the time that was the OPCs, they were looking at, and that committee as a whole actually recommended a short-term use of rent guidelines, where I think it was a percentage increase max that they were allowed, that landlords were allowed to do as a matter of course, and then they had to go probably to a rent tribunal to make the case for why they needed to put more in place. That was what, if I recall correctly, that's what the committee recommended back in the mid-2000s. Now, even though the committee recommended that, and that included Conservative members, what ultimately happened was the government, as I said, chose to offer up a broad-based set of rent supplements, and then, you know, to his credit, Ed Stelmach then invested in a 10-year plan to end homelessness, and there was quite a great deal of investment in affordable housing. That has been lost. That has been pulled back on dramatically, especially over the last 4 years. And then meanwhile, we've got these horrific pressures on regular families here in Alberta and certain communities in Alberta. So now we need to look at a whole range of options, including potentially guidelines that could take different forms depending on the advice that was given, that could be permanent or could be temporary as a short-term measure, or that could be paired with a rent supplement or a more ambitious rent supplement from the provincial government. There's a whole range of options. The key is sitting down and coming up with the best solution for our communities, while at the same time making sure that folks don't wake up in the morning with a note from their landlord saying that their rent is going to go up by 40 or 50%.
Is there a follow-up, Brody?
Yeah, and just to follow up, I'm wondering, the research your party has done, is there any evidence that short-term rentals like Airbnb are contributing to this problem at all in Calgary specifically?
I haven't done the research on that, so I'm not sure, honestly, if that's part of it. You know, we're seeing the problem all across the country in a whole range of different jurisdictions, so that may be part of it. Hard to say, really.
Okay, our next question goes to Michelle Bellafontaine.
Hi there. Thanks for taking my question. The issue of rent evictions is something that we're seeing. Like, what measures would you propose that would be, besides a rent increase, to stop this practice? Because we're seeing, you know, vulnerable people being evicted from their homes, basically because they can't pay these huge rent increases.
Well, we also talked, during the campaign about a proposal for a rent bank, where people could actually, if they were in short-term financial crisis, they could actually get access to basically a rent bank to help them with the top-up or whatever. It's a proposal that's been put in place in BC, and we're watching to see how that's working. So that is one example of a more innovative solution. And then again, you know, and there's short, medium, and longer-term solutions. So the most short-term solution is a temporary restriction on rent-based evictions, and or a restriction on the amount of increase that can happen at any given time. Understanding, of course, that many landlords have legitimate costs that they need to recover, and so there needs to be opportunity for them to pursue those where they can show that. And then you have the longer-term solutions, potentially like a re-implementation of the rent supplement program that was adopted by the Conservatives originally in the mid-2000s. And then, of course, a much more robust investment in different types of affordable housing that provides more spots for folks.
Was there a follow-up, Michelle?
Yes, thanks. How would you respond to criticism that the reason you guys didn't propose a rent cap during the election campaign is because Nate Rotman, who is with Airbnb, was running your campaign?
Literally, that had absolutely nothing to do with it. It really wasn't about that. It was about the desire to do what we're doing today, which is calling for a considered review of market forces and getting stakeholder input from a whole range of folks and looking at what's happening in other provinces and what's worked and what's not, and getting the greatest amount of good evidence in front of us to come up with the best solution. And that's what we talked about in the campaign, and that's what we're talking about now. There's really not a big difference. But I will tell you this, if experts came along and said, no, there needs to be a rent cap for the next, you know, X period of time, and by the way, we also need to limit access to Airbnb or whatever is the case, I'd be all for it. My priority is to ensure that we have enough homes for folks so that they can have affordable lives and provide secure homes for their families.
All right, our last question will go to Dean Bennett.
Oh, hi, Rachel. Off-topic question. I want to ask you more about the Premier's call to Art Pawlowski. She said again at the House yesterday she wants to hear from Nikki Amory, about guidelines to interact with the justice system. I thought we pretty much cleared that up. I mean, you don't interfere with individual cases, and you only ask if it's in the public interest and winnable. What more do we need to learn here?
Well, I would say one thing we need to learn is why Mickey Amory is not appointing a special prosecutor, because that is the most obvious decision that should be made at this point. And quite frankly, the fact that he chose not to and that he suggests the matter is quote unquote closed suggests to me that he is not remotely equipped to provide advice to anyone about guidelines for political communication around active cases. But what she said was frankly deeply inadequate. I will tell you, when she made the comment about how, oh, we're going to have a course about the different levels of government and how they interact with each other and the different arms and branches of government, I thought to myself, as did about half the people in my caucus at the same time, I'll think, I'm pretty sure that's something you cover in grade 10, and it shouldn't be something that we need the Premier to get remedial education on every 6 months.
Is there a follow-up, Dean?
Yeah, but still, my question though is, we're going to have the Justice Minister provide new guidelines for how the Premier will interact with the justice system.
Well, I will say this. I mean,
Isn't it already kind of, what do we need? I guess I'm wondering, we look, what's going to happen here? Are we going to have exceptions now when she can, as I say, it seems like it's pretty, is this not pretty straightforward? There's a firewall. Is this not going to make things worse perhaps?
I mean, honestly, that's a really good question, and I will say when I heard her say it, I honestly took it as, he was going to essentially restate the obvious, and then she was going to say, "Oh, yay! Now I suddenly know the obvious." But you raise an important question around whether or not they're actually going to try and rewrite the constitutionally established relationship between the legislative and the judicial branch of government. Now, if they try to do something like that, obviously we will not stand for it. But I wasn't 100% sure that that's what she was really saying. But for sure, I would be very concerned if we thought somebody in the UCP was going to try to rewrite our Constitution as it relates to the fundamental principles of our democracy.
Okay, no more questions. That's all for today. Thanks, folks.
Thank you very much.